Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the April Electoral Area Services Committee meeting. Just make a quick land acknowledgement here. I'd like to start this meeting by recognizing the homeland of the 30 First Nation communities of this area we now call the Fraser Valley Regional District, where we live, work, and learn. Important decisions that we make at a local government level can affect First Nation communities and Indigenous peoples and organizations in many different ways, both today and in the future. So as part of our collective responsibility, I commit that we continually examine the work we do to ensure that our project, plans, initiatives, and discussions are guided by the principles of inclusion, collaboration, and reconciliation. So with that in mind, I'd like to call to order the April 13th, 2023 meeting of Electoral Area Services Committee. And we will look to our CAO.
Thank you, Chair Dickey. So the first item on our agenda is your report from the Regional and Corporate Services Committee meeting held this morning.
Good. Fairly lengthy report. I believe it was only Directors Davidson and Wardenberg weren't there this morning, but I will tell you what I know. We had a delegation from a gentleman talking about reusable food packaging, pilot project, asking the FBRD to help fund this initiative in the hopes that we are diverting single-use packaging from our landfills. There was a wide-ranging discussion on the logistics, but the RACS committee seemed to generally support the project. And then we moved on into the agenda item. We talked about the social procurement initiative, reflecting social and community outcomes, environmental sustainability, and there were concerns about the costs associated with the project. We talked about the regional grant and aid process, establish a more formal process for regional grant and aid so that there's an individual review. Mayor Horn voiced concerns regarding the politicization of the GIA process. We moved on to talk about agricultural plastics. There has been a program in place for 14 years in Agassiz, and ourselves at the regional district are looking at rolling this out for the rest of the region. We moved on to reusable, this once again, the reusable food packaging pilot project. Motion came before the committee. It was approved. The Directors Horn and Siemens voiced concerns about the FRD contributing funding to a for-profit enterprise. And in the reports from directors, Director Siemens asked for a letter to BC Transit and the Ministry of Labor to suggest that a mediator be appointed to address the BC Transit bus operators' service disruption and the resulting hardship that is causing many people. And that's my summary. Look back to Ms. Kinnaman.
Thank you. So looking for approval of the agenda, addenda, and late items.
Motion, Director Adamo, second by Director Johnson. All in favor? Contrary, motion carries.
Next is 5.1. We have a presentation about the development fee bylaw update.
Mr. Shadman. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chair. My name is Rafiq Shadman, planner at the EA Planning Department, and my topic of presentation is Development Application Fee Bylaw Update. So I would like to start with our progression with the fee bylaw update. In February of 2023, Board passed a resolution to increase the planning fee revenue by 25%. Keeping that in mind, staff presented a report on March 3rd, 2023, with conceptual fee increases for the purpose of starting a discussion. Once we received feedback from the board, we came up with a new report and proposed the new fee schedule, comparison scenarios for various development proposals with neighboring jurisdictions, as well as annual incremental increases. The purpose of our meeting today and the presentation is to collect feedback and guidance from the committee, and it's our intention to bring forward an updated bylaw in May. So how did we come up with this proposed fees? I would like to go over the process. So it all started with the increase in planning fees revenue by 25%. And keeping that in mind, we came up with the conceptual number of 15% to application fees, which would have brought our planning fee revenue increase to approximately between 21 to 23%. Following that, we categorized our applications into two different categories. The first one was applications that results in significant land values. And these are applications that are more complex in nature, requires more time to process, and they generate a lot more value when the density is increased. The second category is the minor applications that do not result in significant value. So these are applications that we receive from individual homeowners who are trying to, say, construct a carriage home for their elderly parents, or maybe operate like a commercial business from their property, and they could apply under these minor applications. The third step was to look at the cost for each of these applications. We did a detailed cost analysis of how much staff time is being spent towards processing these applications, and the public hearing costs, the cost of speaking with various First Nations government, as well as provincial and federal governments. Those were all also taken into account. And finally, we went back to the 15% increase, and the numbers were adjusted. So you'll see in the fee schedule, the sum of the numbers for the applications are higher and some of them were lowered. And it all depends on the application category, the amount of value that it brings to the land, whether it's increasing or decreasing, and thirdly, the amount of staff time that's being spent towards these applications. So what is a minor application? We do not have a defined term for it, but for the purpose of this presentation, we're saying minor applications are routine homeowners applications. So as I mentioned before, homeowners, if a homeowner wants to have accessory employee residential use on their property, they can apply under this minor application category. So there are two different categories. The first one is development permit, which mostly applicants have to apply because it's part of the regulatory requirements. Now, we know development permits are extremely useful, and it brings a lot of benefits to public. Staff have made an effort over the last several years to keep the application fees lower for development permits because it has strong benefits to environmental protection and public safety. So for the purpose of this proposed fee, we have increased our development permit application fee from $300 to $350. And secondly, we have a brand new category of minor rezoning applications. And as you can see, this rezoning application will allow a lot of individual property owners, if they don't have a certain use on their property. So for example, say if someone wants to have a bed and breakfast use or a boarding use, or someone even wants to have a carriage home and they need to go through the rezoning process, they can apply under this category. And staff have made an effort to reduce the application fee from $2,800 to $2,000. The second category here is application resulting in significant new value. So these applications are typically more complex in nature. They could be rezoning applications, OCP amendments, and subdivisions, which often are made to achieve a more marketable development with higher density. We're targeting such developments and aiming for higher cost recovery because these applications generate significant revenue on land and should incur a fee that is closer to cost recovery. So if you look at the table here, the OCP amendment application, our current fee was $4,000. And for major OCP amendment, it was $20,000. What we have done here is we have categorized it based on the number of dwelling units. The reason we have done that is because when we look at OCP amendment applications, we have to understand whether an OCP amendment proposal is feasible for that land. So there's a lot of technical analysis around that. The major OCP amendment is on the higher end. It's a significant increase from $20,000 to $100,000. And the reason is a major OCP amendment is very comparable to a neighborhood plan, completion of a neighborhood plan. The things we take into consideration are housing needs assessment, transit connectivity, pedestrian connectivity, recreational amenities, environmental concerns, impacts to future generations, as well as updates to policies. For zoning amendment, our base fee has been increased from $2,800 to $6,000. And the new category that we have introduced is each dwelling unit, which we didn't have before, and now we will be charging $300. So say someone's applying for a 10-lot single-family dwelling rezoning application, the total fee would be $9,000. I would like to point out that although these numbers, especially the OCP amendment applications, the fees look very high, these reflect our processing cost. In some cases, maybe a 200-unit OCP amendment application could cost even more than this. But it's our estimation based on our previous survey of staff time and the public hearing costs and other costs that are associated. We felt these numbers would make sense and would provide us with improved cost recovery. Now, just to give you an example of this table provides us example of both a minor application as well as more complex applications. So if you look at development permit, we have compared it to 3 different municipalities and 2 regional districts. Our fee is $350, which is very comparable with other local government organizations. For the rezoning, we have 10-lot single-family dwelling, and our cost obviously is on the higher end, the application fee. But I would like to bring your attention to City of Mission application fee, which is $4,000. So now they're charging $4,000 as the base application fee. However, under their zoning, under their fee schedule, there is community amenity contribution. So for each new lot that they're rezoning, there's an application fee of $2,815. So out of a 10-lot single-family dwelling rezoning application, City of Mission would be making $32,000 approximately, but they're charging $4,000, which is their application fee. Whereas FVRD is only charging $9,000, which just reflects our application processing cost. For OCP amendment for 15 lots, it looks significantly higher, $25,000. And I would like to repeat that OCP amendment, it requires a lot of technical analysis. There's a lot of public consultation, comprehensive public consultation with First Nations government, consultation with school districts. So there's a lot of effort that goes into updating the policies as well. If you look at other jurisdictions, their fees are much lower than FVRD's proposed fee. I would like to point you to Regional District of North Okanagan's application fee, which is $2,200. Please note that $2,200 would not even cover the expense of our public hearing costs. Our public hearing requires mail out, renting a venue, as well as staff overtime. So what are the factors that deter development application fees depend on? Is the type of development, the cost profile, economic development strategies. So City of Chilliwack or City of Abbotsford's economic development strategy would be much different than FVRD's economic development strategy, and cost recovery goals of different jurisdictions. Staff believe that rural areas have higher application processing costs because we don't have servicing readily available. So we have to think about the servicing, we have to think about future generations and if the servicing would have adequate capacity to support future development. FVRD is approximately 13,000 square kilometers, and there's a lot of complex landscape with a lot of geohazards and hazards related to flood, as well as environmentally sensitive areas. So we have to take that into account because a lot of our time goes into reviewing those technical reports. There's no economies of scale. So just to provide an example, maybe City of Abbotsford has an infill rezoning application and their application volumes are higher than ours. So once they start receiving a lot of applications, their considerations could be similar and when they write the report. However, in FVRD, we don't receive that scale of applications. Our volumes are lower. So we'll look at every single applications. It's unique, and our considerations and our technical analysis would be unique as well. Implementation of DCC and CSCs in municipalities. So this is a topic which is not the scope of our presentation, but I felt the need to talk about it a little bit, just briefly. Municipalities have a lot of benefit that they receive from development. One of them is development cost charges and community amenity contributions. The reason their application fees is low is because maybe they want to attract more development towards the city because they have all these other charges that they get from development. So what is our current approach? We would like to propose to setting our application fees based on the application processing cost and not benchmarking. Now, benchmarking or cost comparison is a very useful tool that we have used in the past, and it allows us to kind of understand where our fees is in relation to our neighboring jurisdiction. In 2023, our cost recovery was 12%, which was very comparable to other regional districts. However, staff recognized that there are other tools such as implementing application processing cost, and based on that, if we implement the fees, we will have higher cost recovery. It also satisfies our legislative requirements. So in the Local Government Act, the fees for applications should be determined on the administrative, advertising, and processing costs. Annual incremental increase. I'm sure you all have read the report and you've seen the table here with the numbers are a little bit different because we're still trying to refine our numbers. So for the 2024 projected fee revenue, we have $97,000 if we go for a 5% incremental increase, and our estimated cost recovery is 16%. So that's 4% from 2022. And then in 2027, we'll have a total projected revenue of $112,000 with a cost recovery of 18.5%. Staff are leaning more towards 5% incremental increase because 15% increase in application fees is quite aggressive. And I would like to point out that since 2019, we have not made any changes to our application fees. So there has been a gap in the inflationary rate, so which we're trying to bridge with the 15% increase. So that's staff's opinion that a 5% incremental increase would be a good way to start. And then we also have the 10% incremental increase, and that's for committee's consideration if that's the option they would like to move forward with. This will help us keep up with the inflation rates as well as achieve improved cost recovery over the next 5 years. So the purpose of today's meeting is to get feedback and guidance from the committee, and we will use this guidance to bring forward the updated bylaw for consideration in May. And with that, I would like to end my presentation. But before I end, I also have this fee schedule. I'm not sure if it's fully clear, but I tried my best to include all the application fees here. This fee schedule only shows the planning fees. So if you look into the report, you'd see that there's a column for engineering fees, but since the purpose of this discussion is to understand the planning cost recovery, we have taken out the engineering fees. But if committee wants to discuss that, we're open to that as well. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Shadman, for very fine analysis. Directors, any questions, discussion?
Yes, please, through the chair. Thanks very much. Great presentation, some good information there as well. Quick question. How long does an OCP take approximately? How much time would be required to have one ready to present to a community?
Thank you, Director Ademo. Through chair to Director Ademo. It completely depends on the type of application and where the OCP amendment is being proposed. So typically a simple OCP could take anywhere between 8 months to 6 to 8 months, or sometimes 12 months. But a major OCP amendment application can take much longer because there's a lot more things that staff has to review. It's hard to come up with a concrete timeline because when we look at applications, every application is unique. And depending on where it's located, the amount of hazards that are present in that area, public consultation, some OCPs could create more controversy and public would have more opinions and they would like to express their interests. So those are also taken into account while working on OCP amendment applications.
Thanks.
Good. Thank you, Director Adamo. Director Castle.
Thank you, Chair Dickey. Thank you very much for your presentation, and I want to thank staff for responding to our concerns during the financial planning process. I'll be straight up, this far exceeds my expectations of where we'd be 2 or 3 months down the road. So bravo, thank you, good work. These numbers are making much more sense to me than the numbers that we were presented in the financial plan process. I'm very happy with the cost recovery approach rather than the benchmarking. I had some concerns and voiced those concerns about benchmarking. We are not a municipality. We are way better and more complicated than a municipality. So it makes sense that we set our fees based on cost recovery rather than having our smaller tax base have to carry these costs. So I'm very, very happy with that. Very happy with the differential approach with consideration for individual property owners versus large commercial developments or those that stand to gain. And I appreciate the modest increase. We still need to increase fees for property owners as well. But we've got a modest increase and in fact a decrease. And who says that fees never go down? So bravo, kudos. Offline, I did ask the question. I know it was shared with the rest of the EA directors. My question about why 5% was better than 10%. I think you've explained the rationale very well here today, and I would accept that. Seeing cost recovery of 20 to 25% kind of is where I was hoping we'd get to, and we're getting to there. So I would support that staff recommendation. The other question that I had offline, which just so that everyone knows the question was answered, I was asking how this would affect current applications. If you want to just brief us on that real quickly for the record, that would be great.
For sure. Thank you, Director Castle. Through Chair to Director Castle. So it's our understanding that currently any application that we receive will be under the current fee bylaw. And once our updated development application fee bylaw is adopted, any application that we receive after that date would have to pay the proposed fee that's on this table here.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Shadman. Thank you, Director Castle. Oh, Director Davidson out there in Zoom world, please go forward. I think you're muted, Director Davidson.
Sorry about that. One too many mute buttons in my system. Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff. The thing that jumps out at me when I look at the OCP shift, I'm not debating the numbers at all, but I'm just wondering, with the frequency of essentially EA-wide OCP reviews being where they are, and that's, we're looking at that as being a one every 10 to 15 year event. Does that intersect with the need for OCP amendments at all? Like, where I'm going is that if we were doing our OCP reviews in a more timely way, are we likely to reduce the risk for somebody needing or wanting to do an OCP amendment in the first place? Because that seems to be the high ticket value, both for the applicant and in terms of staff time. I'm wondering if staff have any comments on that.
Thank you, Director Davidson. Through Chair to Director Davidson, I think Graham might be able to respond to that question.
Thank you. If I may, through the Chair. Very good question, and I certainly agree with the idea that more frequent updates of OCPs reduces the need for individuals to apply for, say, site-specific OCP amendments. That idea, I believe, holds up, and we're working towards an update cycle of about 10 years for community plans, which probably isn't a particularly bad update cycle, in my opinion, for especially for rural areas where, generally speaking, we're not seeing the scale of development, say, that happens in municipal areas. Perhaps recent events suggest otherwise. We've had some really big development proposals come forward lately. But I will also say this, that our community plans identify housing needs for the period of the plan, and they look at a 20-year or so window. And it's generally not been my experience that that housing need is satisfied within that life of the OCP, if you see what I mean. My experience is that the OCPs leave opportunities for new housing development that's needed to provide for communities' housing needs. And so we're not being pushed into site-specific OCP amendments because the current plans don't generally meet housing needs. Now that won't be true across the board universally, because we have so much diversity in our communities, in our 8 electoral areas, and in our 10 official community plans. But I think it's broadly the case for most of our areas.
Okay, thank you. Just one quick follow-up, Chair. Just to speak to it, I should have spoke to it just briefly, but I do support the staff cost recovery strategy, just to get that on record. Thank you. Great report.
Thank you, Director Davidson. The other discussion, Director Wardenberg.
Yes. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Bill.
Thank you. Through the chair, just a comment. Yeah, I agree. I'm glad at the direction. I'm happy to see this report in front of me. Yeah, I'm very happy at the cost recovery approach rather than depending on raising taxes. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Director Wardenberg. Director Adam.
Thanks. Through the chair to staff, a quick question regarding the minor rezoning applications as it relates directly to, say, Airbnbs and artisan shops and things like that. So this is a recommendation to put that through. What would be a timeline on something, and would any Airbnb be grandfathered in, or would we, I mean, you don't even know who all the Airbnbs are, presumably. So most of the local communities know who they are. Would we have to report on them and get them in? Because when we want them to be properly protected and covered and part of the system. So how is that process to work in the future?
Thank you, Director Adamo. Through the chair to Director Adamo. That's a great question. We are working on defining the minor rezoning application. When we bring forward the updated bylaw, it will define exactly what the process would be and how we're going to go about these accessory residential uses. We have talked about short-term rentals. However, I believe this is something that staff would need to explore more to understand the existing Airbnbs and how we would like to move forward with it to address the concerns.
Thank you. Mulling it over. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Adamo. That appears to have covered off all the directors, and there seems to be very widespread support for your analysis, Mr. Shadman. It seems like you've done a very good job in this. So
Thank you, Chair.
You've got the direction that you need from us?
For sure. Thank you.
Okay, thanks again. And we'll go to the next item.
So the next item is 5.2, which is a staff presentation on the emergency management program.
Ms. College. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. We're repositioned today. It's an interesting angle from here. Miss College, Tarina College, Manager of Emergency Management. Thank you for having me for this presentation. So you've already seen a little bit of exposure to the emergency management program. Today, I'm going to take you through a little bit of a short presentation on why we feel this is the right pathway. Emergency management needs to be built on a framework. And effective emergency programs start with a framework that recognizes what we are, what we do, what we can't do, and what our hazards are. Some of these were key themes within our audit and our audit action plan. I'll look forward to bringing that back to you guys next month with the report that those of you who are around in the last term have asked for, and I'll bring all of the literature forward so that those of you who weren't part of that can become familiar with it. So part of an EM program needing to start with a framework also needs to define what we are so that we can, in effect, carry forward an intentionality in our program. We heard Rafit mention already that we have complex hazard landscapes in FVRD. We have rural citizens, we have single roads in and out of communities, we have areas without cellular or internet, we have creeks everywhere, and they don't always stay in their banks. We don't have jurisdictional authority over those roadways. We don't provide public works services. There's all these things that often exist in municipalities that we don't have the same advantage of gaining access to. It's all the more reason why we absolutely need to build a program that has a strong framework and look at that framework as a policy. And I'm going to have Graham talk a little bit about the importance of policy, and then he'll kick it back my way.
Thank you, Trina. What we're really attempting to do with this document in front of you today, the Emergency Management Program, is to outline what would be the emergency management service. And that's because when we look at the emergency management field and the expectations that can exist in communities and the expectations that the province pushes out, it's an incredibly broad field, and with very high expectations about not only operational response to emergencies, what we do during a response to an emergency, but for planning for emergencies. And so expectations widely can include things like the preparation of livestock evacuation plans, preparing plans for hot weather, preparing plans for cold weather, preparing plans for managing debris after disasters, and the list goes on and on. And of course, Trina described our landscape as one that's very large, pretty small population, complex set of hazards. And we're we have a small tax base and organizational limitations, and that means given the high expectations, the broad expectations, the difficult landscape we work in, and limited resources, we need to be quite deliberate about how we allocate our emergency management resources. And when boards are faced with that challenge of allocating resources, we're going to emphasize community preparedness in our spending. For example, that means we're not going to be doing other things. And when we decide we're not really going to be doing other things, then the risks come with that. The one way local governments manage those risks is through policy. And I'm going to give you a simple kind of example, and hopefully you'll see some parallels there, even though it's quite different. When local governments look at their sidewalks, miles of sidewalks in the community, they'll adopt a policy that guides the frequency of their inspection, and not only the frequency, but also what level of, say, heaving in the sidewalk will generate a response. If the sidewalk heaves less than 1 inch, for example, they'll commonly do nothing. If it heaves between 1 and 2 inches, the response will be to shave it off. If it heaves more than that, then it might be a replacement of a panel. But of course, what that does is protect the local government against claims when someone's walking down the sidewalk and they trip because the panels heave 3/4 of an inch and there's a trip and fall claim. So if the local government is following their policy, inspecting with the frequency that their policy says, and taking action only when their policy says to take action, they're insulated against those kinds of claims. And so we can draw a parallel then with emergency management. And if the province is suggesting that local governments ought to have livestock evacuation plans, for example, and an event arises and we don't have that kind of plan developed, adopting our emergency management program as a policy gives us that policy defense. But it does more, I think, than addressing sort of liability risks. It also presents in a transparent way what we're going to be emphasizing and spending our limited resources on. And it identifies the limitations in our program so that we're being upfront with residents and we're being upfront with the province and others about what it is we are going to do, and by extension, what we're not going to be spending our time and money on.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Danilus. Very nice explanation.
So the fundamentals of the program will remain regardless of what structure we build it in. We need to have bylaws that regulate our program. The Act requires us to have an emergency management organization. We must have an oversight internal governance body specifically responsible for the strategic direction of that program and ensuring that it's meeting its targets and milestones. We need to have an emergency management plan, one emergency management plan, not 10 different little P plans for different specific pieces that may occur, just one. And we can add sections into that plan that are specifically relevant to certain things like Fraser Freshette that happens year after year. We need to be focused on operational readiness. That's the practicing, training, and exercises that make sure that our staff and volunteers, where we have them, are capable, able, and ready to come to work, be at work, and to provide the response services when response occurs. So a large component of an EM program is a training and exercise action plan, not a big P plan, but it's a component of that emergency management plan. And then we need to factor in community preparedness. You've seen this image already. We're going to bring it back again, and it's a core component of the program. If we look at what we're calling our program, the program is the emergency management organization enacted by bylaw. It has responsibility, accountability, and authority for ensuring that we have an emergency management program. It names the plans and guides that we feel are the most important to maintain. Enacting a decision about what we're going to maintain is going to help manage those expectations about hot weather plans and cold weather plans and livestock evacuation plans and what we're going to do when the wind blows left instead of right. We could write plans for everything and still never actually use those plans. But if we have one plan that makes sense for our organization and our jurisdiction, that's a key reduction in the quantity of documents we currently manage and maintain. And of course, we have evacuation guidance, and we call it guidance in here rather than plans because we don't, by law, need to have evacuation plans. We need to have an emergency management plan that includes guidance for evacuations. The province provides us already an emergency evacuation operations guide that's almost 50 pages. And it's very straightforward on the mathematics of how to plan and stage an evacuation. And that's what has been used in the development of our Area H guide. So we'll continue still with area specific guides that would become a part of that emergency management plan. Another benefit to having one document to maintain is that when we do an update to anything, it's always a very current update. It means that we don't lose track of documents in records management systems or files, or they're not lost in time as staff transition in and out of the organization. And then flood response guidance. You'll see here that what we've reflected is that these items are already addressed in the work plan. So we're not presenting a new idea, we're just presenting a format to maintain the things that we have to maintain. Part of our 2023-24 work plan that's already factored into our budgeting is community resiliency, shifting a little bit into the realm of all of the different ratepayers associations and community groups that are already trying to find out a way of supporting their local area, supporting their communities. They already have neighbor to neighbor relationships. And our goal is to figure out what they have as commonalities, how we build upon those commonalities, and how we establish trusted communication links with each one of those pieces so that when there are responses, disasters and emergencies that result in an activation, we have a trusted communication network and that we can actually get information from neighborhoods where we are not receiving communication from. And some of those neighborhoods may be outside of first responder services traditionally, or may have reduced capacity in their first responder services. And then we shift a little bit into our operational readiness. Again, that's training and capacity development of our staff and volunteers for running and managing an EOC, an Emergency Operations Center, and what we're referring to as Evacuee Support Services, or ESS. And we'll carry on linking recovery coordination in this. It's a component of emergency management, but it's triggered in an Emergency Operations Center. And then a recovery plan is established out of that EOC specific to what that incident needs. There's a lot of coordination, but because of our complex shared jurisdiction, we often are not the leads on all recovery projects. And this is helping us to focus what our role is. It's not necessarily recovery operations. It may often be recovery coordination and advocacy. With our plans and guides, we want to maintain one We want to reduce inconsistencies from multiple documents that are not correlated or aligned. We will adopt an all hazards approach within the program, which is a requirement of Public Safety Canada and the provincial government of BC. All hazards doesn't mean we're writing a single plan or a single process for every single hazard. It means that our approach can be applied regardless of what the given hazard is. And by establishing this program, we will be able to move beyond the audit, setting the program as the new measurement, how we benchmark our program and report back to the board. Focusing on community resiliency allows us to factor in the role that residents play in their own preparedness and their own family emergency plans. It shifts us from a model where we are currently called upon for assistance in many ways that we can't provide assistance. Just the simplicity of not having a public works service often limits our ability to do things that in a municipality would be reasonable expectations, like deploying a public works unit and putting a sandbag dam in place in the middle of some sort of disaster. It gives us another lens to look at grant and aid when we see plentiful applications coming in, all with really good ideas, but creating a partnership with community resiliency networks or existing user groups allows us to ensure that when grant and aid is applied for specific to preparedness, it's linked to the program. It gives us an ability to make sure that it's aligned with our statutory authorities and responsibilities and not in competition with that or our first responder services. You could only imagine what it would be like on scene if we provided grant and aid through the FVRD to an organization that thinks they have an authority to run an emergency operations center that they don't, and believes that they have the authority to make decisions when we have first responders down the street making those decisions under the authorities they have. So it's going to reduce some confusion by ensuring that there's an appropriate pathway that makes sense. Creating customized or trusted communication links and expediting our critical response understanding. We have one community that doesn't have first responder services typically, and during the atmospheric rivers, learning who the contact was in that community was invaluable to our EOC. We were able to get so much information about what was going on in that area and what the critical needs were in that area just because we knew one person's name and phone number and they knew ours. And that also reduced call volume from that community because now they become a liaison or a pivot point to the Emergency Operations Center. So that's a little bit of a response piece that grows as a result of neighborhood and community capacity building. We need to get good at our basics. We already provide evacuee support services. We do that through our Emergency Operations Center when we're active in a big disaster. We do it as personal incident support on an as-needed basis when there are single unit incidents. And we do that through telephones and internet now. It's actually quite remote in many ways for the personal disaster assistance. When we need to evacuate a neighborhood, oftentimes we're evacuating outside of our community, and that's a piece that we don't control once they leave our jurisdiction. That's where we lean on our partners. But if we look at what our role is in evacuee supports, it's finding a safe place for people to gather where they may receive food. Ideally, that place has power and heat and light and ability to flush toilets, because that's a real thing when we run on wells and septic tanks. It needs generators. It helps us focus in on what we can reasonably do and what others must reasonably do. There's a lot of information out there on preparedness and literature. Oh, that slide did not work at all. And then it brings us to focus. So it sounds like a lot of really big ideas. I totally understand that it looks like something that's grand when I talk about it. But in all honesty, this program is helping us tighten and narrow the scope and do the things that we really ought to be doing instead of just responding. Our program historically has been response focused or focused on managing and maintaining volunteers that may or may not be activated. We need to shift away from managing and maintaining volunteers so we can actually do the things that we need to do, and then find new models of engaging public action that don't put us in the position of having to manage and maintain the volunteers, but recognize that people naturally in disasters show up in their communities, and they don't necessarily need us to be in charge of that. They need us to give them a framework to operate under. So it's really looking at some of the worst disasters and the history and research that comes out of those worst disasters. Even in our local ones, oftentimes when we've reached out to our volunteer network, the volunteers are also impacted. That's extraordinarily common in our jurisdiction, that your neighbors, as your volunteer supporters, are also impacted by this event. So we're looking to build a model that stops putting us in the control seat of which volunteer is active, how they're active, what time, and instead creates those liaison links between community organizations that say, hey, we've got a building, we can feed people. How do we recover our costs when we do this? And how do we link that through official response? The program is intended to set a benchmark so that we can measure our successes against. What about the Act? We've heard no shortage of information about the Emergency Program Act and its pending changes. We don't know any dates. We have theoretic timelines. There's no shortage of ideology about how great and grand the expectations will be on us. And I can't even say more than just jazz hands because it feels so looming. And ideally, I really sit on the knowledge of the Act and understand, I think we're all in the same alignment. We all want safer communities and we all want public safety. I don't think anyone's opposed to that. So looking forward to what we do know about the Act, having been involved in the Flood Wildfire Advisory Committee, which is the provincial policy committee from late 2018 through its discontinuance weeks ago, we know a little bit about what's coming as far as policy buckets, but we don't know a lot about what the legal granularity is in the Act itself. We do know that it's going to have a new title. It will be the Emergency and Disaster Management Act. So there is definitely a shift from an emergency program to an emergency and disaster management portfolio. But this program should not put us out of the scope of at least being at the foundational level of what may come. We shouldn't be out of alignment. And the reason that I feel confident in saying that is because of our role in that Flood Wildfire Advisory Committee. We're setting a foundation now before that act comes out. And our foundation is aimed to say, we can do this. This is our scope. This is our baseline. And if you want us to do this, we have to use our advocacy processes to look at what's coming. So we're scoping our program to have a strong foundation. Another component that is factored into this a little bit, I'm not going to apply a Canadian standard into our EM program because it's not a provincially regulated piece. That being said, I'm aware of the Canadian Standard Association Z1600, which is the standard on emergency management. And the province has made comments over and over again that they're looking at Canadian standards and Z1 or 1600 as they develop the Act. So being slightly aware of what could play out there is beneficial to us in anticipating things to come. And things that we can't possibly understand the depths of right now are the influence of the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act and what that means to us in our emergency management program under that next act. And that's still looming for all of us. We don't know how it applies. We don't know how it fits in with our budgets. We just can't plan for it. All we can do is anticipate it. That being said, the core of this program should solidify our baseline so that we're not stuck with surprises in a sense that we just don't have the capacity. The expectations may not be wholly different. They might just be more. Where we're looking at training and exercises, they may require more frequency or a grander scope. They're not going to say you shouldn't train and exercise. So we feel confident there. And that's what I've got for you guys. Any questions?
Good. Thank you, Ms. College, for a very nice summary of the emergency situation here in our electoral areas. Director Castle, I see your hand up.
You did not, but you've encouraged me to say something.
Well,
The
you
only,
need encouragement, so.
yeah, I need encouragement. The only thing that's on my mind right now is great job, and I'm very, very, very pleased with the work that's being done in this file. And I believe in my heart that we are in good hands. So thank you.
Good. Thank you, Director Castle, Director McAhonick, and then Director Ward.
Yeah.
I just want to follow up and say thank you and that I appreciate the complexities of our area and what some of the things are going on in. And I especially appreciate how you've made yourself available through 2 different fires and things like that. And I really appreciate that. So, and so do the residents. So thank you.
Thank you, Director McMahon. Director Wardenberg.
Thank you, to the chair. Thank you very much for the report. I do have a question, regarding the community involvement. How do you involve or have you involved, strata councils in emergency planning?
Thank you for the question. I appreciate it. At this point, I have not begun to drive down the pathway of our community preparedness program. Once we get our EM plan program solidified, or sorry, our emergency management plan update solidified moving forward, I'll shift into that project. This year is our strategy. And so as part of the strategy, we'll do some outreach to find out who the players are that have an interest in the area of preparedness. Stratas are a brilliant opportunity to engage. There are a number of partner agencies or organizations that have already expressed their desire to operate in this space. Of course, we've got the Hemlock Emergency Lookout Program. We've got a new one popping up in areas CF and G called Cedar Tree, and they want to look more at a resiliency focus. How do we teach people to grow and harvest and can their own food and be more capable of being independent? How do we bring all these different parties together and find the commonalities and then help figure out what the commonalities are that make the most sense when it comes to grant and aid applications? Because I'm certain that as we build a framework for these community programs and neighborhood organizations, and there's more learning about what grant and aid is, there may be even greater interest in grant and aid accessibility to support preparedness. And then, of course, we have first responder services like our fire departments, volunteers that we do have as FVRD assets, but also other volunteer fire departments like Cultus Lake and Sunshine Valley, where they're not an FVRD department, but in an emergency, they're an incident command unit that provides localized first responder services, regardless of whether they're ours or not. They're an ally, and all of these different groups have a very different approach to what they would see in preparedness. So thank you. I'll make sure that I put Strata on the list to engage with. It's a great idea.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Director Wardenberg, Director Adamo, and then we'll go to Director Davidson.
Thanks very much. Great presentation and some really good information. I got a couple things. First of all, the audit that you're doing throughout each of the communities. Is that a 2023 thing or is that to be done for 2024? And then I'll have a follow-up on that.
Thank you. Through the chair to Director Adamo, we won't be doing an audit as much as outreach. Outreach will be the core focus of that, and we'll be starting the outreach in 2023. And I envision somewhat of a planning type approach to understanding first what each group is interested in, what they are already doing, and looking at how we harmonize those approaches and how we link them to first responder services and how we link them to our EOC.
Okay, so in that case, I guess I would volunteer my own services to assist you in that type of an audit through community outreach, and that I know all of the service groups within every of my area now. So perhaps I can help you with my own area. I have a bit of a concern with your the way you mentioned that ratepayers are going to be used through your service. Most of the ratepayers groups that I've encountered recently are not really true ratepayers associations anymore, in the sense that they're more of a community event planning organization, and they tend to focus more on that and less on political movements or movements that incorporating all of the community. And they tend to not be very resourceful in terms of their communication skills and technology. They tend to use Facebook for communications, which represents in my area 22% of the entire area that's on Facebook when they come up on weekends and things like that. So I'm really concerned with trying to get a bigger picture on who's actually living in our areas, in our communities, and trying to work on that type of a thing. That's all.
Thank you. We won't be limiting the program to ratepayers associations by any means. It just so happens to be that some of the ratepayers associations, right after the Lytton fire, all kind of stepped into, or some of all, I love my oxymoron there. Some of the groups had stepped into preparedness activities locally and just trying to increase their resiliency. And so ideally, we're looking to partner with organizations that have a desire to operate in this space. Not necessarily limit that to what the organization structure is, but that the organization ideally has its own ability to manage funds. Some organizations may or may not have facilities. There could also be faith groups that have an interest in this. Like one of our greatest partners right now is Camp Hope. Holiday Trails is still an absolute ally in our program, despite the fact that I think they're still to this day challenging the province to get reimbursed for their stepping up into the 2021 atmospheric river events, right? So
Every single week.
we have complexities, of course, and we have big groups, we have little groups, we have neighborhood groups, and we have faith groups. And I'm sure there's other groups that I haven't thought of, but once we hit the outreach point, I'm sure more groups will start to nominate themselves for this area.
Good. Thank you, Director Adamo. We'll turn to Director Davidson and then Director Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff, great presentation. You did sort of stumble upon one of my trigger phrases, though, unfortunately, so I have to go there. When I hear the phrase limited resources being used, I tend to think, our resources aren't really limited. It's only what is our political will to essentially tax to fund things that may or may not, that we may or may not want to see get done. So I just hope that staff doesn't operate under the assumption that you have to limit your planning, your operations to within what your resources allow. If it makes sense to expand those resources, then we rely on you totally to tell us and let us know. So please just don't make the assumption that you have to operate within what your resources are today. On the note that similar to Director Adamo's comments, if you're looking to shift away from volunteer management to liaising with community groups, I'm really not sure where that can go or how exhaustively that can go. You use the example of livestock evacuation planning. So, I think in my area, if you've got a poultry farmer next to a horse breeder, next to a dairy farmer, they probably all belong to different agricultural associations. And you may be looking to liaise with a community group that doesn't exist. And in lieu of same, we may still be in the volunteer management business. So it's just one comment I have, and looking for your any thoughts you have on that. But one other question I do have is that on the roadmap to regulatory or legislative compliance, is that coming up in a future meeting, or where does this put us on that roadmap to just being compliant to what we're supposed to do at a provincial level? Thank you.
Through the chair to Director Davidson. Thank you. Really good questions. Limited resources. Thank you for emphasizing that. Oftentimes we say limited resources, not necessarily meaning that we have a structural issue of limited resources, but looking at the limited resources through the lens of what we are capable of doing during a disaster. Of course, we work through contractors when it comes to a lot of the public works types activities and improvement districts that we don't have a jurisdictional authority over. So sometimes when we're talking about limited resources, it's the shared jurisdictional complexities that limit our resource capacities in a disaster. Of course, we do have powers under a state of local emergency. We can do a lot of things when we have that state of local emergency, but we're always working through external contractors who have a choice as to whether or not they operate in those dangerous spaces and in those areas. So that is another complex aspect of resourcing, especially when it comes to roads, road type works, and public egress. Other limited resources are things that are tactical resources, such as hotels, commercial accommodations, restaurants. Small communities like Yale don't really have places where people can eat. And we saw that during our 2020 atmospheric river, where 18 people were stranded in Yale between two landslides. 8 of them were local residents impacted by a mudslide through their complex. 8 were stranded travelers. Yale's got nine motel rooms, no kitchenettes, no grocery stores, no restaurants, no gas stations between those two landslides. So how do you serve a populace that is displaced by a disaster when you have these challenges due to shared complexities, aka limited resources? It's a really important thing to consider volunteers versus volunteers. And while they're the same word, it's volunteers versus managing volunteers. Our program historically has been focused wholly on managing volunteers. Recruiting, training, developing, managing, and we have one of our volunteers as a committee member now. And so there's familiarity with the history of our volunteer program. And that's not to say that volunteers aren't a valuable, amazing asset that provide invaluable services to communities, but it's also looking a little bit at our rurality. If we're going to manage teams of volunteers, FVRD has a lot of work to do to put the policy framework in place that respects those volunteers, provides training, uniforms, mileage coverage, fuel, food when they're on training and exercises. And these are things that had never been budgeted here before, and they were just kind of fit somewhere as and when they were necessary. Another component to that is that people show up during disasters. They always do. And it's a very normal process in disaster management to have a plan that focuses on how we manage convergent volunteers, the people who show up. And that really just takes one great-minded person who understands coordination and risk, and they can take on the world in an area and assign people to tasks that need to be doing. And that can be done in areas where there is a fire service with a little bit of oversight from fire as an incident commander to that geographic area. In areas without a first responder service, it can be done through that lead type person. And that takes us out of managing the day-to-day HR portfolio of every single volunteer across 13,000 square kilometers. So we don't want to limit volunteerism. We just don't want to be managing a volunteer team, because the reason that we weren't compliant with our statutory responsibilities was that our focus was volunteer management instead of emergency management program maintenance. We need to maintain the program. We need to have a program that we can maintain, and we need to have the framework that keeps us in that lens. And then as far as the roadmap, that's coming to you at May, I believe it's 11th in the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting.
So thank you. Just for context, my comment on limited resources, I'd inferred, again, using the example of a livestock evacuation plan, that an emphasis on plan, not on the resource to actually do it. My take on it was that we don't have the resources to plan everything that somebody might want planned. And these are I can see how it's potentially unlimited, but it's a case of prioritizing what's of greatest impact to the area, and look for the things that got the biggest buck on it, or biggest bang for your buck. Just strictly from a planning perspective, what my comment about limited resources was related to. So yeah, just for context, but thank you.
Thank you. I can connect with you a little bit more offline too to help set some of the context there.
Good. Thank you, Director Davidson. Director Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to express my thanks to the staff and Tarina who have worked on the emergency management program. I'd like to thank them for their expertise and say certainly have done an excellent job. And I have no doubt that we're in good hands. So thank you.
Good. Thank you, Director Johnson. A lot of directors who are very impressed with the program. This call, you should be commended. So. Thank you. And next item, Ms. Kinnaman, please.
Thank you, Chair Dickey. So 6.1 is the draft Electoral Area Services Committee of the Whole meeting minutes of January 26th, 2023.
Your submissions, move Director Wardenberg, second Director Dixon. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor. Contrary, motion carries.
6.2 is the draft Electoral Area Services Committee meeting minutes of March 9th, 2023.
Motion Director Makahonic, second Director Castle. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Contrary, motion carries.
7.1, we have a 2023 grant and aid request for the Chilliwack Area Lions Clubs in Electoral Area H.
Director Dixon moves, second Director Johnson. Discussion. Hearing none. All in favor? Contrary, motion carries.
7.2 is a 2023 grant and aid request for the Cultus Lake Community School Association in Electoral Area H.
Move Director Dixon, second Director Wardenberg. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Contrary, motion carries.
And 7.3 is the 2023 grant and aid request for the Cultus Lake Park Community Events and Engagement Committee in Electoral Area H.
Director Dixon is shoveling money off the back of a truck. Move Director Dixon. Second Director Adamo. Any discussion? Director Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just sort of think I should comment. There's a lot going on in my area, so happy to support all three of these and
Wonderful.
good luck to them.
Any other discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Contrary, motion carries.
8.1 is Electoral Area C Official Community Plan Update. It's a project status update. It's information item. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, discussion. All is well with the community plan, it seems. Director Wardenberg, did you down?
Yeah, I just have one question through the chair to staff. Being this is the early times of this process, what's the anticipated timelines for the whole thing to be wound up or to be adopted?
Pick a number, any number.
Thank you. If I may, through the chair, we anticipate having a draft plan ready for committee review by the end of this year. And so that would mean that we'd be looking for, say, first reading and moving on to a public hearing in the first quarter or so of 2024. And that means if we extend it out, then adoption middle, depending on how well things go, whether we've hit the mark, what sorts of changes needed that come out of your review and public hearing and referrals and so on. But we'd be looking to adopt by middle or end of 2024.
Okay, follow up, but just, so we're at meeting, this is the second meeting. How many more public engagement meetings do you anticipate?
The short answer is several. And it'll take several meetings to get through the policy areas that we need to hit on in the OCP. But also our approach is, of course, we want your guidance, but our typical approach is that if issues arise, if we hit roadblocks, then we work through them through meetings or through engagement events. And that just gives us an opportunity to understand the issue, work through it, inform people about how we're responding. And hopefully that way, that issue still isn't on the table when we get to a public hearing. We've resolved it, or people understand that we've worked through it to the extent that we're able. So that adds time, and sometimes we add meetings is what I'm trying to tell you.
Okay, thank you. If I can continue. So there's a couple things going on in Area C. One is the Harrison Mills neighborhood plan as well. And just for my information, if you could just clarify. So the neighborhood plan is separate, but is it going to, will it be included as a component of the OCP through what process?
Yes. Through the chair. Yes, the Harrison Mills neighborhood plan will essentially be a schedule, a chapter in the OCP. And in my ideal world, the timelines for both projects come together neatly, and we'd roll the neighborhood plan into the new Area C OCP, and the public hearing and process would then dovetail and it'd be one and the same. Now, if either of these projects is delayed, we'd like to remain open-minded to bringing them forward separately. And in that case, let's say the Harrison Mills neighborhood plan is ready to come forward for your consideration of adoption and going to public hearing before the overall Area C OCP. We'd like the flexibility to do that. And in that case, the neighborhood plan would become a component of the existing OCP. And then of course it would roll into the updated area-wide OCP to come.
Okay, and one final thing. At this point, I was reading through the report, and I've been at the meetings. The response so far, being the meetings are held at the DeRoche Community Hall, is majority of the people that are coming are from Lake Erock area, is shown on the report. Could I ask that at least one of the future community engagement meetings be held at the Harrison Mills Community Hall, please?
Most certainly.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Director Wardmer. I just might add, as Mr. Daniel just pointed out, the projected termination dates can certainly become much delayed, and things can become very complicated, as I found out in our own official community plans. I wouldn't hang my hat on that date. Director Castle and then Director Dixon.
Thank you, Chair Dickey. I spent a considerable amount of time reading through the public engagement comments, questions, and feedback. And I just have to say that I'm encouraged that what I read seemed to align with the concerns that I have expressed at this table in previous meetings. And I hope that those pursuing development along the Route 7 corridor will consider the common themes in the public feedback by residents who will be affected by the development and that we represent.
Good. Thank you, Director Castle. Director Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's certainly a lot of work in here. So my question is probably not so much about this report, but certainly a notice, and I understand that the need for First Nations consultation in what we do, and I'm happy to see that and things like that. Is there an opportunity to so I'm going to assume that moving forward, this is part of FARD work, but is there an opportunity to kind of like, I don't want to say streamline it, like, as I think if there are several First Nations, 15, I think, and this one too, well, see, are those all individual? Is there an opportunity to work with all of them and say, could this work? Like, does I'm just sort of thinking that this is a good work, but it's also extensive work, I'm assuming, on staff as well. So just curious about that.
It certainly is extensive work, and we the regional district, of course, overlaps with 30 some individual First Nations, and different First Nations also have in addition to individual First Nations, there are Aboriginal governance organizations that we would work with too, right? So they might be a tribal council, for example. We certainly look for opportunities to be efficient in it. For example, by working through the people of the River Referrals Office, that's an opportunity to get a referral out through one portal to multiple First Nations. And that's really effective at times. But really, also, we take our cue from the individual First Nations themselves. And some and this can vary from time to time, but they're very comfortable working through the people of the River Referrals Office, and others want to engage and meet directly, even though they participate in the pro. And so really we take our cues from the bands themselves and the people we're working with, and try to, within our capacities and abilities, work with individual bands on the terms that they want to work with us on.
Good. Thank you, Director Dixon. Let's see any other directors asking. This is an information item, so we'll move on to the next issue.
Thank you. So the next item is 8.2, which is appointment of building officials, and there is a motion for your consideration.
Move Director Johnson, second Director Wardenberg. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, contrary, motion carries.
8.3 is temporary changes to liquor licensing at the Sasquatch Inn in Electoral Area C.
Move Director Wardenberg, second Director Castle. Any discussion? That area C is a jumping place, yeah. All those in favor, Director Wardenberg, go ahead.
I guess I should say something here. The Sasquatch Inn is a very important little place in Area C, and I fully support the fundraising events that are been proposed here. I support the ownership completely. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Director Wardenberg. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, contrary motion carries.
8.4 is an agricultural land commission application for non-adhering residential use at 13080 Stave Lake Road in electoral area F.
For a
Move
motion. Move
Davidson.
Director Davidson. Second, Director Adamo. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, contrary motion carries.
8.5 is an agricultural land commission application for a boundary adjustment at 432 Maple Falls Road in electoral area H.
Motion, Director Dixon. Second, Director Makahonic. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, contrary, motion carries.
8.6 is development variance permit 2023-02 to increase the size of a commercial advertising sign at 52964 Yale Road in electoral area D.
Motion, move Director Adamo, second Director Wardenberg. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, contrary, motion carries.
8.7 is the Rogers Telecommunications Tower at 26700 Trans-Canada Highway in electoral area B.
Motion, move Director Adamo, I think, second Director. Who would like, second Director Johnson, any discussion? Director Adamo.
Yeah, this is the first of two that's coming up in my area right now. So through the chair to staff, I had questions that I expressed at the one that's not listed in this today's presentation. However, my questions are the same. What would be the actual coverage of this new tower? What will it represent in terms of coverage for that community? Everyone seems to want to know, is it in fact the best location for it? It's going to be on the same piece of private land that a current TELUS tower is already located on. And it'll be considerably higher and carry more satellites, I guess you call them. And plus it'll have the potential to carry more in the future. But so there are only a handful of people in that area, but many are just wondering if the coverage is actually going to be sufficient for what they're saying.
Good.
And is that the best location currently?
Through the chair, if I may.
Mr. Downs.
We will follow up with the proponent, who's Rogers, to get a better understanding of what they feel their coverage is and why they feel this is their very best location. It may come down to an agreement with the landowner and the presence of the TELUS tower on the same parcel of land. We did ask Rogers to consider co-location or locating their own antennas on the TELUS tower, and we were advised that that's not viable for them because the TELUS tower, the top part of the tower is already taken out, and they wouldn't then have the height for their antennas to get over top of the trees and the train. So I do know that height is what's important to the Rogers proposal, but we will follow up with them and see what further information we can get for you.
Thanks.
Good, thank you, Mr. Danilus. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carries.
8.8 is the Fraser Valley Regional District zoning amendment bylaw number 1692 for the implementation of accessory dwelling units and secondary suites.
Okay, for a motion, move Director Dixon, second Director Wardenberg. Any discussion? Director Dixon.
I just really want to thank you for bringing forward this policy. I have a question. It might be in one of the older versions, but when I'm reading it, it seems that lots that are like half-acre lots or things like that, or is it silent or can they have a secondary suite in them? Because many already do. Like that's sort of what I was wondering with that, because I was reading 1 acre and more and things like that. So
Through the chair to Director Dixon. The policy that was adopted by the board a few years ago and that we follow through with the zoning amendment would allow suites as an outright use, permitted use in the zoning bylaw for parcels greater than 1/2 hectare. And so that's 1 acre and a quarter. For smaller parcels, the policy direction was that they would make individual rezoning applications, and that way the unique considerations of the neighborhood could be addressed through a rezoning application. And what the tact that the policy identifies is that those rezoning applications ought to be streamlined. And we're taking the first steps there by identifying a low application fee to remove that as a barrier. But otherwise, we're intending that there be a streamlined process for rezoning to allow, say, a suite on a 1/2 acre parcel, like many that exist, say, in Area E, for example, or in Area D around Popcom.
Good, thank you, Director Dixon. Director McMahonic.
So Area E will be exempt from this until we have the study done. So in the advertising and in the material, is that going to be well documented so that it's easier for me for my community to be able to get the word out? I think people want, but if it's, I'd like to see that it's addressed not just as Fraser, the regional district, but that it is clear that Area E is exempt.
That's great advice and guidance for us. We'll take that to heart and make sure in our communications we're very clear about that.
Good, thank you, Director McMahonic. And maybe Mr. Danlus might make a quick comment that recent provincial government announcements have created a situation which might supersede this.
Yes, that's quite true, Chair Dickey. The province has announced its intention to make secondary suites legal in all communities across the province. And their intention is this spring to introduce legislation to that effect, or rather this fall. So this fall we'll have more details. Now, how the province will go about doing that, whether a provincial enactment will simply make all second suites legal, or whether the provincial enactment would compel local governments to amend their zoning within a certain period of time. Of course, we don't have those details yet. We're talking with the province one-on-one, but also through our various organizations, professional organizations and so on, to try to get a better understanding of how the province will be rolling out and what their timelines are. But we're confident in that this proposed zoning amendment that would address accessory dwelling units and suites would put us a good part of the way there, depending on how the province rolls this out. And if the province introduces new legislation that goes beyond what this zoning amendment would allow, of course, then we'd have to come back to you next year, or whatever the case may be, to make those changes as well. But we feel like we'll be much of the way there with this zoning amendment, and perhaps even ahead of the curve a little bit, depending on the province's timeline.
Good, thank you, Mr. Downs. Good, so on the motion, all those in favor, contrary, the motion carries.
Moving down to 9.1.1, we have deployment of fire departments for out-of-region wildfire events. There is a motion for your consideration.
For a motion, move Director McMahonic, second Director Castle. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, contrary, motion carries.
10.1 is the Regional Growth Strategy Connections to Electoral Areas Update. It's an information item, but I know staff would be happy to answer any questions.
Directors. Director Davidson.
Thank you, Chair. So I have to apologize in advance for where I'm going on this one. I did speak at length with staff earlier in the week. Well, first off, thank you, staff, for incorporating the changes around rural landscape and rural communities that were in the earlier draft. And I know we also have 5 new directors on the board, so the regional growth strategy process started before I did in 2018 and ran partially through the last term, and now it's into this term. In my discussions with Ms. Stewart and Mr. Bukins, it was basically around the greenhouse gas targets. And I'm wondering, can I ask staff to bring up the draft regional growth strategy on screen so I can just, would that be possible? Take us to page section 8.1, because there's a couple of things I do want to talk about, and I'm unsure procedurally how to go about getting these things changed at this point.
It will
And
take us a few minutes to get that on screen, Director Davidson, but if you want to reference the page number in the document, I'm sure that most have the agenda in front of them with the document.
sure,
But otherwise,
on the
you'll just have to
PDF,
wait a few moments because it will take us a few minutes to pull that up.
on the PDF, it's page 54 of 60.
So for those of you that are looking at the page numbers on your agenda, it's 332 agenda number, page 54 of the report. Did you want to speak to it, Director Davidson, while we're trying to upload it?
Thank you. So, okay, so two things. One is, if I look at 8.1, the bullets B and C together, we basically have in the draft RGS a target of GHG emission reduction of 50% per capita according to 2007 levels, and get that reduction by 2050. So nationally, the federal government target is net zero by 2050. And it's not per capita, it's just net zero. Provincially, it's 80% by 2050 based on 2007 levels. And again, it's not per capita. You can go online and look at what BC's population was estimated to be in 2007 and where it's projected to go up to 2045. And even just going up to 2045 compared to 2007, you're looking at basically a 78% increase in population. So if you're going to have a per capita reduction in GHG emissions of 50% by 2050, according to 2007 levels, that actually works out to be, if you're just going with 2045 projected population, it just works out to be 11%, a little over 11% reduction in GHG emissions. And that's very, very, obviously very considerably less than what the provincial target is, which is even less than what the federal target is. So based on that, there's just no way that I could support the regional growth strategy as it's written. In discussions with staff, if you look at bullet C, it says to update the FERD's greenhouse gas monitoring methodology and update regional greenhouse gas reduction targets accordingly. This one to me is pretty counterintuitive in that you don't update your targets based on what data is that you gather. You update your strategies, whether you update your strategies towards any goal based on your monitoring tell you whether you're on target or not. So it looks like it's saying in paragraph C, let's get our monitoring in place and then we'll know what our targets could be. But that's certainly not happening at the national level. It's not happening at the provincial level. We look at neighboring municipalities. I believe Metro Vancouver, they're either adopted the federal target or failing that, the provincial one, but certainly nothing as unambitious as our own one in this draft. And even I think talking to Ms. Stewart, she knows this topic better than I do, but I think Mission has adopted the provincial target, Chilliwack's adopted the federal one, Abbotsford's is still a work in progress. So yeah, anyway, for me, given the atmospheric related events we've had of the last term, there's just no way that I could support something that's as unambitious as the targets that are in the RGS right now. So I'm sorry for going on for so long, but I think at a minimum, I'd like to see us in this document before it goes to first reading, that we're referencing the provincial targets and that we're changing paragraph C to just simply say, update the FERD's GHG monitoring methodology, period, and exclude the thing about updating targets based on what we monitor. So anyway, that's my say. I'll just step back and let other people speak if they have something to say. Otherwise, I'm mindful to raise a motion to that effect. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Director Davidson. Any further discussion, directors? So you'll certainly be given an opportunity to voice your concerns at the board level, Director Davidson, which might be a good place for this discussion. The electoral area's impact on greenhouse gases in this region is fairly minimal relative to the municipalities, I expect. So maybe we could move forward in that direction.